Welcome to our discussion on a fascinating topic, Cambodia's political dynamics and how the regime manages to get away with authoritarianism.
I'm really excited to dive into this. The whole idea that elections are held, but then the power dynamics are so skewed is pretty intriguing, yeah?
Absolutely. It's like, the Cambodian People's Party, or CPP, manages to secure an overwhelming majority of seats even when its popular vote share is significantly lower. In 2003, for instance, they got 47.4% of the votes, but ended up with about 59.3% of the seats, which highlights how the electoral system works in its favor.
Right. That disproportionate distribution is key to understanding how the authoritarian character of the regime is maintained. It really sets the stage for a centralization of power, doesn't it?
Exactly. And this highest average proportional voting system is designed, or rather, functions in such a way that larger parties get a better deal, effectively sidelining smaller opposition parties, making it nearly impossible for a genuine democratic shift to occur.
And that, of course, plays into the narrative of almost a one-party state, where any challenge to the ruling power is systematically undermined. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, the use of tactics beyond just electoral mechanics.
Right. It's not just about the numbers. Hun Sen's regime, for instance, employs a range of strategies like intimidation, co-optation, and even manipulation of foreign aid to maintain governmental control and neutralize opposition.
I've noticed that international intervention sometimes inadvertently supports these dynamics, doesn't it? Instead of fostering democracy, it ends up enabling an already well-entrenched system.
Exactly. International stakeholders often provide aid with the hope of stabilization, but in Cambodia's case, that aid gets strategically used by the regime to reinforce its position. It's like a double-edged sword where the intended support bolsters an authoritarian system.
Now, one point that really caught my attention is the aspect of corruption. I mean, having civil servants paying bribes, on average around $44 a year, it's a small detail that speaks volumes about systemic issues, right?
Yes, that detail is striking. It's like a microcosm of broader misgovernance. The persistent corruption not only undermines public trust, but also creates a kleptocratic environment that further entrenches the authoritarian regime, making any check on power nearly impossible.
But I do wonder, if corruption is that endemic, why does such a high level of public dissatisfaction not lead to a revolt or perhaps even a shift in political allegiances?
That's a good point, and it's a bit paradoxical. Public opinion is complicated here. For instance, there was a 2004 survey showing that while an overwhelming 96.8% of Cambodians supported trials for Khmer Rouge crimes, about 44.1% were skeptical about the fairness of the trials. It seems the people are caught between a desire for justice and a fear of an unfair process that could further destabilize the situation.
So it's like there's this cautious optimism, a hope for accountability, but also a significant distrust of the mechanisms that are supposed to deliver it. That's a tough spot for any society in transition, right?
Exactly. And it's a testament to how historical trajectories and legacies play into modern politics. The CPP's long rule, backed by memories of stability post-Khmer Rouge, and even the fear of political violence, creates a kind of status quo that many feel is preferable to chaotic uncertainty.
I see that. But let's challenge a bit. Don't you think that sometimes this narrative of better the devil you know might just be a consequence of limited alternatives? I mean, are there any viable political reforms really on offer, or is it more of the same cycle?
That's a critical observation. Although there are calls for electoral reform and genuine democratization, the reality is that the system is so entrenched that reform appears nearly impossible without a seismic shift in power dynamics. It's like trying to reboot a computer that's been rigged from the start.
Yeah, true. And this whole situation begs the question of the legitimacy of elections themselves. Holding an election only to manipulate the outcome through institutional design leaves a bitter taste, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It raises the specter of what some scholars call hybrid democracy, where democratic institutions exist in name but are hollow in practice. In Cambodia, elections are essentially a facade for consolidating power rather than a true contestation of ideas.
And then there's the aspect of political opposition. Parties like FUNCINPEC and SRP have largely become irrelevant due to persistent marginalization. It almost seems as if any democratic space is systematically pruned away by the regime.
Exactly. The strategy has been to, essentially keep the opposition in check through a combination of legal and extra-legal means. This not only prevents a real challenge to Hun Sen's authority, but also keeps the political playing field uneven.
Right? I guess another layer to this is the idea of international perception. On one hand, there's criticism of the regime, but on the other, some international actors have been complicit due to their own strategic interests.
Indeed, international politics can be quite messy in this context. Some external powers seeking stability or strategic alliances end up indirectly supporting the status quo. It's, like an intricate chess game where every move is calculated for immediate interests, often at the expense of long-term democratic values.
Now, here's a thought. Don't you find it interesting how the discourse often overlooks the agency of the Cambodian people themselves? I mean, a huge majority supporting justice mechanisms like Khmer Rouge trials suggests that there is an appetite for accountability.
Certainly, and that's where the complexity lies. The public is not entirely complacent. There's a genuine desire for change. Yet, the fear of an unfair process and the weight of historical and political legacies inhibit a complete break from the system. It's kind of like being trapped in a cycle where, you want to move forward but are constantly pulled back by skepticism and risk.
That's a very nuanced perspective. It seems the challenge is not just political, but also psychological. The people are conditioned to expect, and maybe even accept, certain levels of misgovernance as inevitable.
Exactly. And the strategic use of foreign aid plays directly into that mentality, providing enough stability to prevent chaos, yet reinforcing the central power structures. The allure of stability first often overrides the call for true, sweeping democratic reforms.
Which brings us to a kind of ironic twist. The very measures that create a semblance of order end up undermining democratic legitimacy. It's, almost like the myth of the benevolent dictator, where people sacrifice freedom for a promise of stability.
Yeah. It's like a misguided bargain where the cost of stability is eternal authoritarian rule. The Cambodian case really exposes how intricate and, frankly, precarious that balance is.
And it makes you wonder, what would actually need to change for Cambodia to transition toward a more genuine democratic system? I mean, is it possible to untangle these deeply rooted power structures without spiral violence or chaos?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Reform in such environments requires a fundamental overhaul not just of political institutions, but of the entire societal mindset. It's like, trying to change the operating system on a computer that's been running the same program for decades.
Well, it sounds like incremental change might be the only realistic hope, but that too may be stifled by the regime's tactics. There seems to be a kind of entrenchment that makes quick shifts almost unthinkable.
Precisely, and unless a significant internal or external shock occurs, the cycle of authoritarianism might just continue. That's why scholars often emphasize the importance of both, internal dissent and constructive international engagement aimed specifically at bolstering democratic institutions, not just stability.
Right? I agree. And it's vital to consider that any meaningful reform must empower the genuine will of the people, rather than imposing solutions from outside that might just reinforce the current system.
Exactly. It really comes down to ensuring accountability and creating real channels for political change. And, that's what makes Cambodia such a compelling case study in understanding how authoritarian regimes can persist even under the banner of elections.
Yeah, absolutely.